I always thought that if you worked hard enough, loved deep enough, and stayed loyal through the worst of storms, you would be rewarded with something lasting, something real, something no affair or midlife crisis could ever tear apart. For 27 years, I lived under that illusion like a man sleepwalking through a beautiful dream, never realizing that the ground under my feet had been slowly, almost lovingly, hollowed out. Every morning, I kissed the same woman goodbye as I left for work, the same woman who laughed at my bad jokes, cried with me at funerals, and whispered promises under the old oak tree in our backyard where we once danced barefoot after a bottle of cheap champagne. And yet, even in those golden memories I replay now like a fool, there were signs, faint whispers of warning hidden in her absent-minded glances, the way she sometimes clutched her phone a little too tight, or how, after certain nights out with the girls, she would slip into bed smelling faintly of someone else's cologne, a scent she would swear belonged to her perfume when I, like an idiot, asked. It was easy, terrifyingly easy, to dismiss these things because routine is a powerful drug, and love, when it turns into duty, can make a man blind even to the cracks splitting the very foundation of his life. I convinced myself that every small betrayal of trust was simply a trick of my overworked mind, that the late nights, the secretive smiles over unseen text messages, the sudden spike in gym sessions and girls' trips, to nowhere in particular, were all just symptoms of a woman rediscovering herself, a woman I was proud to support because I believed marriage was about lifting each other up, even when the wind threatened to knock you down. Meanwhile, I worked 70-hour weeks, missed birthdays, canceled vacations, put off hobbies, all to give her the life she said she wanted. The life she smiled about at cocktail parties when she bragged about how lucky she was to have a husband who understood her need for freedom and growth. Looking back now, the most brutal realization isn't that she betrayed me. It's that I handed her the knife and dared her to use it, trusted her to only ever hold it close in protection, never once imagining she would choose instead to drive it between my ribs the first chance she got. If you had asked me a year ago, I would have told you without hesitation that my marriage was solid, stronger than most, a testament to hard work and love grown over decades like a sturdy oak tree, impervious to storms. But the truth, as I would soon discover in the most devastating way possible, was that the tree had been hollow for years, eaten from the inside out by secrets, lies, and a selfishness so deep it made a mockery of every vow we had ever exchanged. And I, in my blind devotion, hadn't just missed the signs, I had ignored them. It was a Wednesday afternoon, one of those painfully ordinary days when life feels so predictable that you forget for a moment just how easily everything can shatter. When the first crack appeared, so small and subtle that if I hadn't been running late for a meeting, I probably would have never noticed it at all. I was rummaging through the kitchen drawers, looking for a receipt for some work expenses, when I stumbled across an envelope half buried under a pile of old grocery lists and junk mail. Not unusual, really, except that this one was from a luxury hotel 2 towns over, the kind of place we used to dream about visiting back when we were young and broke, and the idea of room service felt like something out of a movie. I turned the envelope over in my hands, feeling the weight of it, sensing that it held something heavier than paper, something far less innocent. But when I pulled out the folded receipt and saw my wife's name printed neatly at the top, alongside charges for champagne, spa services, and a second guest listed under Mr., I felt a cold trickle of suspicion slither down my spine. Still, and this is the part that keeps me awake some nights, I told myself it was nothing, that there must be some logical explanation, because the alternative was too ugly to look at directly, like staring at the sun until it burned away everything you thought you knew. I laughed it off, a hollow, desperate sound that even my own ears didn't quite believe, shoved the receipt back into the drawer, and told myself that maybe she had booked the room as a gift for a friend, or maybe her sister had used her name. Any lie, however thin, was easier to swallow than the idea that the woman I loved could be leading another life behind my back. That night at dinner, when she smiled across the table and asked about my day, I smiled back, pretending that my world hadn't just tilted on its axis, that the ground beneath my feet was still solid, that I wasn't already beginning to drown in a sea of questions I didn't dare ask. But once you see the crack, no matter how small, you can't unsee it. It lingers there in the corner of your mind, spreading slowly like a spiderweb across glass, until everything you once trusted starts to feel fragile, hollow, false. Over the next few weeks, little things began to gnaw at me. The phone left face down on the kitchen counter whenever I walked into the room. The unfamiliar charges on our credit card bill labeled under vague descriptions like wellness retreat or boutique services, the late nights at book club meetings that always seemed to run just a little too late for comfort. And yet, like a man patching up leaks on a sinking ship, I kept bailing out the water, telling myself that if I just loved her harder, supported her more fiercely, became the man she needed me to be, somehow I could repair what I hadn't even realized was broken, not knowing that it was already far too late, and the betrayal was much closer and much crueler than I could have ever imagined. I never used to believe in gut feelings, not really, because life had taught me that most things could be explained away with enough logic, enough trust, enough blind faith. But the night that changed everything proved how deadly it is to ignore the quiet alarm bell screaming somewhere deep inside you. I had been scheduled to return from a 3-day conference in Dallas late Friday night, a trip she had barely acknowledged when I left, too busy laughing into her phone as I kissed her cheek goodbye, but a last-minute cancellation cleared my afternoon, and I decided, in a moment of stupid romantic optimism, to catch an earlier flight and surprise her with takeout from her favorite restaurant, maybe even a bottle of that ridiculous overpriced wine she always claimed tasted like velvet. I imagined her face lighting up when she saw me walk through the door, imagined a night curled up together, imagined everything except the cold, gut-wrenching reality that waited for me instead. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway, which didn't immediately strike me as odd. Maybe she had gone to the gym, maybe she was visiting her sister, maybe 1,000 other innocent things I was still desperate to believe. But as I climbed the porch steps and slid my key into the lock, I noticed the strangest thing, the faintest, almost imperceptible vibration of the house, like the bass of music too low to hear but strong enough to feel. I pushed the door open, my heart pounding harder with every silent step I took across the hardwood floor, my brain already scrambling to explain why the living room was spotless, why her keys weren't on the hook, why the heavy scent of a man's cologne, spicy, unfamiliar, and defiantly masculine, clung to the air like a warning. I stood there in the dark, the takeout bag dangling from my hand like a stupid prop, waiting for her voice, her laughter, anything, but the only sound was my own breathing, shallow and uneven. Like a man realizing too late that the fire had already consumed the house he thought was still standing. When she finally burst through the front door 20 minutes later, flushed and laughing into her phone, she stopped dead in her tracks at the sight of me standing there like a ghost she hadn't expected to see. For the briefest, sickening moment, a flicker of panic crossed her face, not fear, not guilt, but calculation, and just as quickly it vanished, replaced by a brittle, almost too sweet smile as she ended the call and breezed toward me. Her words rehearsed and sugary as she spun a lie so thin it barely covered the truth. "Oh, honey," she said, voice high and fake as plastic, "I was just out with the girls, you know, blowing off some steam. I didn't think you'd be home until tomorrow." And God help me, I wanted so badly to believe her that I smiled back, handed her the cooling bag of food, and let her kiss my cheek with lips that tasted like another man's aftershave, telling myself, with all the desperation of a man clinging to a sinking ship, that love meant giving the benefit of the doubt, even when everything inside you is screaming that you are being played for a fool. After that night, something inside me, something old and trusting, withered and died quietly, and in its place grew something colder, sharper, a part of me that no longer hungered for explanations but for the truth, raw and unvarnished, no matter how ugly it turned out to be. I couldn't live another day strangling myself with the rope of false hope, smiling across the dinner table while my heart bled out beneath my ribs. So the very next morning, while she was sipping coffee and pretending to plan a weekend getaway, just the two of us, I excused myself under the pretense of an early meeting and drove 40 minutes to a small, nondescript office parked between a pawn shop and a payday loan place. The kind of grimy, invisible building where truths are bought and sold without the polish or pretense of a fancy downtown law firm. His name was Marcus Baird, a private investigator with a face like worn leather and eyes that had clearly seen the worst of human nature. And when I laid out my story, my hands shaking with something that wasn't quite rage, but wasn't sadness either, he listened without judgment, nodded once, and said, "If she's lying, we'll know. And if she's not, you'll sleep better knowing you checked." The next 2 weeks crawled by with the slow, grinding horror of a nightmare you can't wake up from. Each day a twisted exercise in self-control as I smiled at her fake affection, played the dutiful husband at dinner parties, and nodded along to her wild plans for our future. All while Marcus sent me encrypted updates that made my blood boil beneath the surface of my too calm exterior. At first, it was little things, lunches that stretched into suspiciously long errands, late-night visits to bars she had never mentioned, receipts tucked into her purse from jewelry stores and boutique hotels we had never stepped foot inside. But soon, the evidence became undeniable, brutal in its clarity, like a knife slipped between my ribs by the very hands I used to hold in church pews and hospital waiting rooms. There were photos, too many to count, grainy but clear enough to crush every last defense I might have tried to cling to. Her wrapped around a man I had never met, laughing into his chest in parking lots, holding his face with a tenderness she hadn't shown me in years, her body language screaming intimacy, ownership, desire. All the things I had thought were mine alone, reduced now to sick, empty gestures with someone who wasn't even trying to hide. Every morning I woke up beside her, her lies curling into the sheets like smoke, and I burned with a quiet, calculated fury, a rage that no longer sought confrontation, but waited patiently for the right moment to detonate everything she thought she was getting away with. I wasn't just going to catch her. I was going to destroy the fantasy world she had so carefully built atop the ruins of my love, to make her face the devastation she had unleashed while she smiled and laughed and lied without shame. And as Marcus handed me the final piece of the puzzle, a hotel bill with her signature on it, signed just days before our anniversary, with the note, "Can't wait for round two," scrawled in a hand that wasn't mine, I realized something deep and cold and liberating. I didn't have to save my marriage, because my marriage was already dead. All that remained now was to bury it properly, and make damn sure she was the one left standing at the graveside. The real betrayal didn't come with a kiss on another man's lips or a whispered promise in a hotel room. No, the real betrayal came sitting across from me at our worn oak kitchen table, where for years we had shared late-night laughter and tearful confessions, as she poured a glass of wine, tucked her hair behind her ear in that infuriatingly casual way, and told me, without a flicker of remorse, that she was unhappy, and had been for a long time. I watched her, numb and strangely detached, as she spun a story so carefully crafted, so deviously polished, that if I hadn't already seen the damning photos and hotel bills with my own eyes, I might have actually believed it. How I had grown distant, how I didn't understand her anymore, how she needed space to find herself again. It was almost impressive, in a grotesque way, watching her rewrite history with the cold precision of a surgeon slicing away the parts that didn't fit her new narrative, carefully erasing the years of sacrifice, the nights spent holding her through sickness and sadness, the lifetime I had built around the idea of us. She accused me, of neglect, painting herself as the poor, trapped victim of a loveless marriage while sitting in the same house I had worked myself to the bone to afford, wearing clothes bought with my overtime hours, sipping wine poured from a bottle I had picked up on my way home just to see her smile. I could feel something snapping inside me, something old and fundamental, but I kept my face neutral, my voice calm, because the time for screaming and accusations had passed. Now was the time for patience, for strategy, for gathering every poisoned arrow she so generously handed me and aiming it right back at her heart when the moment was right. While she spoke of needing a break, I nodded sympathetically, played the understanding husband she still believed she could manipulate, and inside I quietly memorized every word, every smug little glance, every poorly disguised text she snuck beneath the table while thinking I was too broken, too blind to notice. In the days that followed, she moved through the house like a ghost already halfway out the door, talking about temporary separation and time to think. But in reality, Marcus's daily reports told me the truth. She wasn't searching for clarity. She was shopping for condos with a man who wasn't me, scheduling viewings during therapy sessions, picking out countertops and flooring while I tucked away the documents that would later tear her perfect little fantasy life to shreds. The more lies she told, the calmer I became, because I finally understood the one lesson I should have learned a long time ago. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. And when they hand you the matches, don't just light the fire. Burn the whole damn thing to the ground. There comes a moment in every man's life when the weight of betrayal becomes too heavy to bear in silence, when the quiet dignity of patience rots into something colder, something jagged and dangerous. And for me, that moment came on a rainy Tuesday night as I sat alone in our dimly lit kitchen, a stack of damning photographs spread out before me like a crime scene I could no longer pretend didn't exist. It wasn't just the images of her draped over another man, her smile brighter than anything she had reserved for me in years, or the handwritten love notes I had recovered from her hidden email account. No, what finally snapped the frayed tether holding my self-control together was the discovery of a lease agreement signed in her name for a sleek, downtown condo that she had planned to move into next month, while I would be left alone in the hollow shell of the life we had built together, like a fool standing in an empty cathedral long after the service had ended. I confronted her that night not with rage. Rage would have been a gift she didn't deserve, but with a cold, cutting calm that scared even me a little, because it wasn't the anger of a betrayed husband anymore. It was the quiet fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. I laid everything out on the table, the photos, the receipts, the text messages, the lease, and asked her, in a voice so steady it felt almost detached, to explain herself. For a moment, just a heartbeat, the mask slipped, and I saw it. The calculation, the selfishness, the absolute lack of remorse in her eyes. Before she caught herself, twisted her mouth into a trembling, pitiful smile, and tried to spin a new web of lies so grotesque it almost would have been laughable if it hadn't been so pathetic. She said I had pushed her away, that she needed more than I could give, that she deserved to be happy. And maybe if I had been a better man, none of this would have happened. As if her betrayal was my sin to atone for. As if my loyalty and sacrifices had been nothing more than background noise to her endless, selfish craving for more. Standing there, staring at the woman I once promised forever to, I realized something devastating but strangely freeing. She hadn't just stopped loving me. She had stopped respecting me. Long before the first lie was told, long before the first text was sent, long before the first night, she slipped into another man's bed and convinced herself she deserved it. There was nothing left to salvage, nothing left to mourn. The woman I loved didn't exist anymore. Maybe she never had. And as she sputtered and pleaded and finally resorted to throwing every vile accusation she could muster at me, I simply turned, walked away, and began quietly setting in motion a plan that would not just end our marriage, but expose the hollow, grasping, deceitful creature she had become for the whole world to see. There's a clarity that comes once you realize someone you loved would have gutted you without a second thought if it meant saving themselves. And in that clarity, you stop playing the role of the loyal fool and start becoming the architect of their downfall. The morning after our confrontation, while she moped around the house pretending to think about our marriage, I met with the most ruthless divorce attorney in town, a woman whose reputation for disassembling cheating spouses piece by piece was legendary. And when I laid the evidence in front of her, the photos, the financial statements, the secret condo lease, she smiled the way a lioness must smile at a wounded gazelle and said, "We're going to bury her so deep she won't know which way is up." Within hours, the paperwork was in motion, divorce filed under irreconcilable differences but armed with a mountain of proof, financial accounts discreetly frozen or redirected. My name quietly removed from any joint liabilities she had opened in secret, in the house, our beautiful house, legally shielded under my name, pending court approval, ensuring she wouldn't walk away with a single brick she didn't bleed for. But revenge, true revenge, isn't served behind closed doors where no one can see. It has to be public, undeniable, and shattering, because someone like her, someone who thrives on admiration and carefully curated lies, fears public humiliation more than any courtroom judgment. So I set a trap so subtle she never saw it coming, a final attempt to talk things over, an invitation to a gathering at our favorite restaurant, under the guise of saving face with friends and family who still believed we were simply going through a rough patch. She accepted, of course. Her ego demanded an audience to watch her play the misunderstood heroine. What she didn't know was that every mutual friend, every family member, even her own coworkers, had been quietly invited with the promise that a very important announcement would be made, and sitting in that private dining room, surrounded by people who once admired her, She would finally be unmasked in front of the world she had so carefully deceived. I spent that week smiling, playing the part of the forgiving husband while she plotted her escape, blissfully unaware that the escape route she had so carefully mapped was about to collapse beneath her feet. I watched her prance around the house, humming to herself as she packed little bags for self-care weekends with her lover, oblivious to the fact that every move she made was another nail in the coffin I had built with her own lies. And as the day of the gathering approached, I felt not fear, not sadness, but a deep, chilling satisfaction, because for the first time in months, I wasn't the one trapped in the web. She was. And this time, there would be no lies left to spin, no sympathy to manipulate, no escape hatch to wriggle through. Only the cold, clean break of reality slicing straight through the fairy tale she thought she was clever enough to live forever. The restaurant was warm and humming with life that night, the clinking of glasses and low murmur of conversations weaving together a false sense of normalcy, while underneath it all, just beneath the polished surface, the trap I had spent weeks building was primed and ready to spring. I had reserved the private dining room, a soft, beautiful space with high ceilings and walls lined with photographs of smiling families, a cruel and perfect backdrop for what was about to unfold. One by one, the people who mattered most, our friends, our families, her coworkers, the ones she had lied to with a dazzling smile and careful deflections filtered in, drawn by the promise of a special announcement, and the chance to celebrate what they thought was another chapter in our long, enviable love story. She walked in last, wearing a flowing blue dress and that same nauseating, practiced smile she wore whenever she thought she had won, her arm grazing mine possessively, her voice syrupy sweet as she thanked everyone for coming, completely unaware that the mask she had clung to for so long was about to be torn away in front of everyone who still believed she was worth admiring. When the room settled and the appetizers were served, I stood up, glass of champagne in hand, heart pounding not with fear, but with the electrifying certainty that nothing would ever be the same after tonight. I thanked everyone for being there, painted a picture of the life we had shared, the years of sacrifice, the dreams built from scratch, the promises whispered across pillowcases, and as I spoke, I watched her bask in the attention, her hand squeezing my arm as if she were the loving wife she had long since ceased to be. And then, with the calmness of a man who had already buried his grief and now stood only with truth as his armor, I shifted the tone. I spoke about betrayal, about deception hidden behind fake smiles, about choices made in the dark while pretending loyalty in the light, and as her smile froze, as her fingers tightened into claws against my sleeve, I pulled out the manila folder Marcus had helped prepare, thick and damning, and began to read, slowly and methodically, itemizing hotel stays, jewelry purchases, text transcripts, condo leases, and photographs, every betrayal, every lie, every ounce of her carefully constructed new life laid bare under the heavy, horrified silence of the people she had fooled for so long. Her face, once so smug and radiant, drained of color until she looked almost ghostly under the soft lighting, and when I placed the divorce papers on the table with a final, deliberate flourish, the spell finally shattered. Gasps rippled through the room like a shock wave. Heads turned, whispers ignited like brush fires. And in that moment, standing exposed before everyone she had so expertly manipulated, she didn't reach for me, didn't apologize, didn't even try to deny it. She simply stood there, trembling, her empire of lies crumbling in real time, while I set my glass down, smiled politely, and walked out of the room with the kind of freedom only a man who has nothing left to fear can ever truly know. In the weeks that followed the public unmasking, her once glittering world collapsed with the quiet but devastating precision of a controlled demolition, and there was a grim, almost surreal satisfaction in watching the consequences unfold exactly as I had predicted, exactly as she had earned. The friends who once flooded our home with laughter and shallow compliments disappeared almost overnight, their invitations revoked, their calls unanswered, their polite distance a louder condemnation than any words could ever be. Even her closest confidants, the ones she used to gossip with over overpriced mimosas, ghosted her with ruthless efficiency once the full extent of her betrayal became public knowledge. It turned out that people loved a good success story, but what they loved even more was watching a fall from grace. And as the gossip spread like wildfire through our small town, aided, no doubt, by a few strategically leaked details, her name became synonymous not with sympathy, but with selfishness, deceit, and humiliation. Financially, the damage was even more brutal. And as much as I had once loved her, I made damn sure the court documents were airtight and merciless. Thanks to the mountain of evidence Marcus had helped me compile, she was denied any claim to the house, barred from touching my retirement accounts, saddled with her own mountains of debt that she had secretly accumulated in the shadows of our marriage. The sleek downtown condo she had signed for with dreams of a glittering new life became her albatross, draining her dwindling resources month after month, until eventually, faced with mounting bills and no one left to bail her out, she was forced to sell it at a loss, retreating not to some triumphant new chapter, but to a dingy apartment far from the gleaming image she had once carefully cultivated. I didn't gloat, not openly. I didn't need to, because her bitterness and isolation spoke louder than any victory dance ever could, and the few desperate texts she sent me in the dead of night, thinly veiled behind pathetic attempts at checking in, went unanswered, deleted without a second thought. What broke her? Finally, what truly shattered the last vestiges of her pride wasn't the money or even the public shame, but the cold, brutal realization that the man she had dismissed as boring, predictable, and disposable had been the last person in her life who ever truly gave a damn about her well-being. She had traded loyalty for lust, stability for excitement, love for ego, and she lost everything. I heard, through the small-town grapevine that she so once loved to dominate, that her new soulmate moved on the moment the financial strain hit, ghosting her as easily as she had once ghosted me in pursuit of something better. In the end, she wasn't left with love or freedom or some shiny new life. She was left alone, bitter, and aging fast, a cautionary tale whispered about at barbecues and book clubs, while I, finally free from the wreckage she created, stepped into a future that was mine to build from the ashes she thought would bury me. The funny thing about hitting rock bottom is that once you claw your way out of the rubble, breathing the sharp, clean air of freedom for the first time in years, you realize how suffocating life had been long before the collapse, how you had mistaken comfort for happiness, loyalty for fulfillment, and routine for love. In the months that followed the finalization of the divorce, with the dust of betrayal finally settling at my feet, I made a choice I hadn't made in decades. I chose myself, not out of selfishness, but out of a deep, fierce understanding that life was too short to be spent dragging dead weight up a hill that only I cared about climbing. I sold the house that had become nothing but a tomb for broken promises, bought a smaller place overlooking the river, and started building a new life brick by brick, beginning with the simple, revolutionary decision to figure out who I was without her. Not the man she needed me to be, not the image of the dutiful husband, but the man I had been too busy sacrificing to remember. I traveled more in 1 year than I had in the last 2 decades combined, standing in the shadow of the Grand Canyon with nothing but silence and a beating heart for company. Riding a motorcycle along the Pacific Coast Highway with the salt air whipping my face clean of old ghosts. Sitting quietly in a cafe in Rome watching strangers laugh in a language I didn't understand, but somehow felt more at home with than any forced conversation I'd had in my own living room for years. I learned to sail, something I'd dreamed of as a young man but always put off because there was always something more important, and found a kind of peace on the water that no amount of counseling or apologies could ever have offered. I reconnected with old friends who had been quietly pushed out of my life during my marriage, rediscovered hobbies abandoned in the name of compromise, and, slowly, without even meaning to, opened my heart to the idea that maybe, just maybe, not all chapters ended in betrayal. Now, looking back, I realized the greatest gift she ever gave me wasn't the love she dangled like a carrot or the life she claimed to build with me. It was the brutal, necessary severing that forced me to wake up and start living a life that was mine and mine alone. At 50 years old, I am not the broken man she thought she left behind. I am stronger, freer, and infinitely happier, with a future so wide open it feels almost blinding sometimes. She, on the other hand, remains trapped in the wreckage of her own making, a prisoner of the lies she once wielded so carelessly, and me? I've sailed far beyond her reach, carried forward by winds she will never again be strong enough to stand against.